Welcome back to this short clip on writing good programs and tackling questions. So what is a good program? Well, a good program should have a good structure. Now this is really important because it helps with debugging and developing your program. So in this particular example, we normally have a main part of the program which will have subroutines running off it, and each one of those subroutines will in turn have other subroutines. So we must have good structure. Another very important point is good variable names. Now variable names should tell you what they are doing and what they mean. So these variable names a equals 10 is not a good variable name. I is b equals input. This isn't a very good variable name. However, if we created the score variable called score and a variable called user option, this tells us a lot more about what the variable's about. So these are a big tick, as you can see. So what else makes a good program? Well, it should all have lots of comments in code. So when you write your code, you clearly comment what every part is saying. So as you can see here, I've written some code and I've clearly identified when I wrote it, what each part of the program is about, so that when I come back to this program, I will know exactly what it's doing because I've clearly written comments in it to help me debug and develop the program over time. So comments are really important. Good techniques. What do I mean by good techniques? Well, for example, if you take this bit of code here, you'll see, well, this is not a very efficient way of writing code because I've repeated the same line 7 times. Why not make use of loops to replace those 7 lines of code? So that is a good technique, using appropriate loops. Efficiency. Does my program do it in the most efficient possible way? So again, we've got a program here that loops through a list and to find a particular name. So it'll loop through and iterate through until it's found the name. And then it says if found, print found, if else, print not found. However, why go through the entire list if the name I'm looking for is the first element? Why not create a while loop? And so instead of going through the entire list, keep going to the list until you find a name. So this is a much more efficient way of writing that code. Good logic. What I mean by that is it the best way you could approach this problem logically? So I've used 3 if statements here in this particular validation, when instead of using 3, I could have just used 1. I don't need to test for all those other values, I just need one test that says, is this number between 1 and 20? So forth. So that's good logic, good simple logic. So a good program, in all the things I should have good structure, should have good variable names with meaning, should include lots of comments to help debug the code afterwards, should use good techniques, and finally should be efficient and logical. Hopefully when you tackle a problem, you have all these things in mind. So the next part is to look at breaking down a particular task. So we're going to take 2 approaches, a simple approach and a slightly more advanced approach. So take this problem here. So Alton Town are holding an election with 3 candidates, A, B and C. An electronic voting booth will be used to allow people to vote. So this is a simple problem which allows the candidates to vote either A, B or C. The program will keep a track of each vote for each candidate, and then it'll keep allowing each person to vote until they type in the end, and at which point it will print out the total votes for candidates A, B and C. So we take this problem, and first thing to do is go through each part of the task and see how we can construct the program. So the first part, which basically says allows voters to enter A, B and C. So we're going to initialize some variables. So if you look at these variables here, we're going to initialize the variables A, B and C to values 0. Now when we create programs, we always try and initialize the variables first that we are going to use. Notice in the second point, we need to allow the voting to continue until you type in end. Now this can be achieved using a simple while loop, and the while loop will continue until you type in the end. So we'll put that code in here. Now notice I've created a variable called vote. What vote will allow us to do is initialize to 0, nothing, because that's what you're going to enter in the vote. And we keep looping until you type in end. So while vote does not equal end, carry on voting. The vote is the input, either A, B or C. Now we also need to keep track of how many votes is achieved by A, B and C. So we're going to do this by using simple if statements. So if the user entered A, then we add 1 to A, and then the next one we say if the vote equals B, then add 1 to B, and if the vote equals C, then add 1 to C. And we will keep on through this loop until you hit end, and at the end we will then print out the totals, simply as shown in lines 14 to 17 here. Now that is a very simple approach. So we've taken that problem, broken it down into steps and created the complete program, as you can see here. So now we are going to extend the program to include functions, parameter passing, dictionaries and validation. So going back to the program as we've started at the beginning, and again we're going to have allowing user to enter votes, keeping a track of those votes, and then when they input end, display the totals. So I'm going to take this program and break it down into a structure, into functions, starting off with a main function which we'll call all the other functions. So the first function I'm going to define is the initialize function, which will essentially initialize all the variables that I need in my program. So I will then call another function called input votes, which will simply collect the votes in a loop for each candidate. And then I'm going to have an enter vote function which will validate the votes that I've put in. And lastly, I'm then going to create a function to just display the totals for each candidate. So I've now taken this program and structured it in a way that I'm going to now create the program. So I'll take each one of those functions I've identified and then create the heading for each part of that function. So if we look at the Python program, you can see here I've defined all the functions that I'm going to need along with the parameters that I'm going to pass between each function. And as you can see, I've left the main at the end because that's the bit that's going to be called when you first run the program. So looking at line 28 where the program will be called. So we have the code as you can see here, and from the main we are going to start off with line 29, which will essentially initialize the dictionary to nothing. We then use that dictionary to pass to the next function, which is input the initialize the candidates. We are then going to input the candidates, and then we are going to display the totals. So taking each one of those functions that I've called in turn. So if we again look at the first function, which is initialize candidates, we pass as a parameter, pass by reference, the candidate dictionary. We then create another dictionary in line 15 called new values, so which will set each candidate to 0. Now remember, in dictionaries, the first value is the key value, and the second value is a value associated with that key. So in this case, 0. And so you can see they've got the keys A, B and C, candidates A, B and C, with the values 0, 0 and 0. We are then going to update the candidate dictionary that's been passed by reference to this function with the values I've just created. Now we have to do this because if we said candidates equals new values, that would create a new dictionary within this function, which would essentially ignore and wouldn't be passed back to where it was called for. So we have to use the update method to say, we've got this dictionary already, just update it. So that will return my initialized candidates list, and then we call the input, passing again the candidates dictionary to this new function. So we've got there the input vote, again showing you the candidates dictionary being passed. In line 20 we then set the user input to nothing, while the user input does not equal end, so keep on looping until I enter end, get input from the user at line 22, and we say to ourselves, well, if I don't enter end, I'm not finishing the voting yet, then call the enter vote, passing the parameter candidates and the user input that I've been just entered from the user. So again, looking at the enter vote function, so this, as you can see, we've taken the dictionary candidates and the vote that I have, the user has casted, and we say, well, if the vote that's been selected does not exist in the candidate list, then obviously you've selected a value that isn't a candidate. So then we need to say incorrect candidate selected, try again. Otherwise, we can add to the dictionary using the letter that you've entered as the key value to add 1 to that key value. So we now go back to the program, it loops through, and it will do that for each candidate until you type in the end value, in which case then we go to the last function, which is display the totals, which again will pass the dictionary candidate list, the updated with all the votes, to that function. You will then print the title number of votes, or the program will print the number of votes, and then we loop through each candidate in the candidates dictionary and we print the number of votes for that candidate, as you can see. Now notice we refer to the dictionary and we refer to the candidate, the key value, to return the corresponding votes for that particular candidate in the loop, and that will just display in that format. And then finally, when we finished that main function, we finish the program. And here you can see in its entirety the complete program with functions, validation, and a little bit of flexibility in the sense that because we've created a dictionary, if we wanted to in the future, we could add more candidates and the program would still function quite happily. So to summarize, we have learned how to structure a program using functions. We've also looked at how we pass parameters between those functions and how we use a dictionary to record the candidate votes. We also looked at using simple validation, and then finally we finished off with including a program which allows for future development, i.e. adding more candidates. So hopefully this has been useful to you, and in future lessons we will develop some of these concepts further. Thank you.